is just like a calculator. You've heard this before, right? Maybe you've even said it. It sounds reasonable, balanced, common sense. But let me ask you something. How many times this year did your calculator write an email for you? How many times did it make you question whether a photograph or video was real? How many times did it threaten to eliminate your entire profession? Welcome back to Cyberspace. I'm your host, Leslie Poston, and today we're talking about something I call thought-limiting phrases. Those seemingly wise statements that actually stop you from thinking critically. They're mental stop signs disguised as green lights. Some people call them thought-terminating cliches, and once you learn to recognize them, you'll notice them everywhere. So what exactly makes a phrase thought-limiting or thought-terminating? Well, first, it sounds reasonable, even wise, on the surface. You feel almost foolish questioning it. Second, it shuts down further questions rather than inviting them. It's a conversation ender, not a conversation starter. Third, it creates false equivalencies or oversimplifications. It takes something complex and flattens it into something simple. Fourth, it makes disagreement seem unreasonable, hysterical, or naive. If you push back, you're the problem. And fifth, and this is the key, it often serves someone's interests by keeping you from examining an issue too closely. These phrases are everywhere, in politics, technology, your workplace, maybe even in your own head. They're cognitive shortcuts that benefit someone, but usually not you. Let me show you what I mean. Let's start with technology and progress. You can't stop progress is one phrase. Really? Can't we? This phrase assumes that all change equals progress. It removes human agency entirely. We've stopped or slowed plenty of things that were presented to us as progress despite their anti-progress consequences. Things like leaded gasoline, CFCs, thalidomide, and human cloning. This phrase wants you to believe that technological development is like gravity, inevitable and unstoppable. But it's not. It's a series of human choices. And you can't stop progress is designed to make you stop thinking about whether you should. Here's another one. People said the same thing about the printing press, or electricity or cars or whatever you want to insert there. This is a false historical parallel. Sure, people have worried about new technologies before, but that doesn't mean all technologies have the same impact, the same risk, or the same distribution of benefits. The printing press didn't guzzle water. Electricity didn't threaten white-collar jobs. Cars didn't make you question photographic reality. Context matters and scale matters. Specifics matter. But this thought-limiting phrase wants you to skip over all that. Let's move our focus to privacy. The phrase, if you're not doing anything wrong, you have nothing to hide. This one assumes a perfect justice system, no mission creep, and that what's considered wrong by society never changes. It ignores that privacy is a fundamental right, not something you earn by being, quote, good. It also ignores power dynamics, governments and corporations hiding information from you while demanding transparency from you. But the phrase makes questioning surveillance seem paranoid. Workplace phrases are particularly insidious. Like, we're all family here. No, we're not. This exploits emotional bonds to justify unpaid overtime, blurred boundaries, and lack of professional protection. Families don't tend to fire each other for missing quarterly targets. This phrase wants you to feel guilty for having boundaries or asking for fair compensation. And then there's the phrase, it is what it is. Fatalism disguised as acceptance. This phrase removes all agency. Nothing is ever just what it is. Someone decided it, someone benefits from it, and someone could change it. But this phrase makes questioning seem pointless. Politics gives us some classics. such as the famous "both sides are the same," false equivalence at its finest. This phrase discourages discernment, nuance, and holding specific actors accountable. It's intellectual laziness packaged as political sophistication. Or the phrase, "let's agree to disagree." Now, sometimes this is legitimate. Genuine value differences do exist. But when it's used about factual matters or to avoid accountability, it's a thought-terminating cliche. "Let's agree to disagree" about whether climate change is real isn't wisdom. It's avoidance. Personal responsibility has some doozies as well, such as the phrase, "everything happens for a reason." This removes human agency and accountability. It also puts the blame on victims, suggesting that they attracted whatever bad thing into their life. It makes examining systemic causes seem pointless. Things don't happen for a reason. They happen because of causes, many of which we can identify and potentially change. One of the most evil examples is the phrase "just following orders," which we're hearing more of lately. It's the total abdication of moral responsibility. We literally fought a war and had Nuremberg tribunals about this one, and yet it persists. And finally, in our information landscape, the phrase "do your own research." This delegitimizes actual expertise and implies all sources are equally valid. But someone's 3 hours on YouTube is not equivalent to someone's decade of peer-reviewed study. This phrase has been weaponized to make people distrust experts while trusting random internet strangers. But here's the flip side. The phrase "trust the science." When this is used to shut down legitimate scientific debate, questions about methodology, or discussions about conflicts of interest, it's just as limiting. Science is debate. It's questioning. "Trust the science" can become a thought-terminating cliche when it's used to avoid an examination of things like who paid for the study, if the study is robust, or whether the study is unbiased, and so on. So these phrases show up everywhere, across every domain of life. But why do they work so well on us? What's happening in our brains when we hear them? There are several cognitive mechanisms at play here, and they're all powerful. There's cognitive closure. Humans crave certainty and resolution. Ambiguity feels uncomfortable. These phrases provide a false sense of case closed. They give us the feeling that we've reached the end of inquiry, even when we haven't. That relief you feel when someone says "it is what it is cognitive closure. Your brain is grateful to stop processing. There's also social proof and conformity. These phrases often invoke, quote, "everyone knows," or, quote, "people always say" dynamics. They carry the weight of collective wisdom even when they're not wise at all. Disagreeing with them can feel like you're disagreeing with everyone, and that's by design. There's also the fluency heuristic, or cognitive ease. Simple explanations feel more true than complex ones. I talked about this in the episode on comfort in more depth. But the phrase "AI is just a tool" is 8 syllables and uses familiar concepts. A nuanced explanation of AI's unique characteristics, risks, and benefits, that's work. Your brain prefers the simple version, and that preference gets mistaken for truth. There's also what psychologist Robert J. Lifton called thought-terminating cliches. He studied totalitarian systems, particularly thought reform programs, and he identified these cliches or thought-limiting phrases as a key feature of ideological control because they provide ready-made answers to complex questions, signaling virtue or group membership. And critically, they punish deeper inquiry as inappropriate or suspicious, kind of a "you're either with us or against us" mentality. It is what it is. Everything happens for a reason. These phrases just end your thinking, and that's their function. There's also status quo bias. We have a cognitive bias towards believing that the current state of things is natural, inevitable, or preferable. Many thought-limiting phrases exploit this. Like "it's always been this way" weaponizes status quo bias. And lastly, there's something called a false dichotomy. These phrases force you into predetermined, usually binary, boxes. Phrases like, you can't stop progress, boxing you into the, so are you pro-progress or anti-progress? Or phrases like, if you have nothing to hide, boxing you into the, so do you have something to hide or not? These aren't real choices, but the phrases make them feel like the only choices. Now, here's an uncomfortable question. Who benefits from these phrases? Sometimes it's obvious. Corporations benefit from you can't stop progress. Surveillance states benefit from nothing to hide. Bad bosses benefit from we're all family here. But sometimes we benefit, or we think we do, because thinking is hard and nuance is exhausting, and uncertainty is uncomfortable. Sometimes we want the phrase to be true because it lets us stop wrestling with complexity. These phrases aren't always malicious, but they're always limiting. And understanding why they work, understanding their cognitive mechanisms, is your first line of defense. So let's go deep on one example so we can see all of these mechanisms in action. Going back to the phrase, AI is just a calculator, or the broader version, AI is just a tool, let's examine why this phrase works psychologically and then why it's wrong. Why it works. It appeals to familiarity. We've integrated tools before and we've survived. Tools like cars, phones, or computers. This frames AI as just another step in a comfortable pattern. It implies that critics are technophobes or Luddites. It creates a dichotomy, reasonable people who accept tools or fearful people who resist them. It frames AI adoption as inevitable. Tools get adopted. That's what happens. Resistance is futile. And lastly, it shifts the burden of proof. Suddenly, skeptics have to prove harm rather than proponents having to prove safety or benefit. All of those psychological mechanisms we just discussed, they're all firing on all cylinders here. Now let's look at reality. Scale, integration. A calculator does one thing, arithmetic, and you use it occasionally, when you choose to. AI attempts to replace human cognition across all domains, and it's being integrated constantly, often invisibly, whether you choose it or not. Then there's learning and competence. You have to learn mathematics before a calculator is useful. And you must understand what you're calculating and whether the answer makes sense. AI lets you bypass learning entirely in writing, art, coding, in every subject. It doesn't augment competence, it replaces the need for it while simultaneously degrading our cognitive abilities. Then there's reliability. A calculator is deterministic. 2 plus 2 is always 4. AI is probabilistic. It generates plausible sounding outputs that can be completely wrong, and it does this confidently. A calculator doesn't hallucinate, but AI does, frequently. And let's talk about social consequences for a sec. Calculators don't create what people call work slop, that barely coherent AI-generated content that shifts the cognitive burden onto others. Your coworkers now have to spend their time fixing what you outsource to AI. That's not productivity, it's cost shifting. Calculators don't threaten mass job displacement. They didn't eliminate accountants, they changed what accountants do. AI is being marketed explicitly as a replacement for human workers across entire sectors: customer service, writing, programming, art, and analysis. The scale of impact is completely different. Calculators don't enable industrial-scale disinformation. You can't use a calculator to generate thousands of fake news articles, deepfake videos, or propaganda pieces. AI can, and it does. Calculators don't consume massive resources. AI training and operation guzzles water for cooling and electricity at enormous scale. Data centers are straining power grids and water systems and dumping toxic emissions into nearby poor neighborhoods. Your calculator just uses a watch battery. Now, the psychological and cultural impacts are there as well. Calculators don't make you question reality. They don't make you wonder if a photo is real, or if that voice on the phone is your grandmother, or if that video actually happened, but AI does. Calculators don't substitute for human connection. They're not being marketed as companions, therapists, or friends the way AI is, and that's profoundly different and troubling. Calculators don't steal and monetize creators' work. AI systems are trained on millions of copyrighted works without permission or compensation, then used to generate competing outputs. That's not a tool, that's systemic appropriation. Now, are there similarities between AI and calculators? Of course. Both involve automation, both can be misused. Both require some human judgment about when and how to use them. But those similarities don't erase the profound differences. The function of the phrase, AI is just a tool, is to flatten all of those distinctions. It makes AI adoption seem as mundane and inevitable as owning a calculator, and prevents nuanced discussion about implementation, regulation, distribution of benefits and harms, labor impact, environmental cost, and epistemic risk. It shuts down legitimate questions by making them seem naive, and that's exactly what a thought-limiting phrase is designed to do. So, how do we fight back? Here's a recognition checklist. When you hear a phrase that might be thought-limiting, ask yourself, 1. Does this phrase make me stop thinking or start thinking? If it feels like a conclusion rather than an invitation to explore, be suspicious. 2. What complexity is being flattened or erased? What distinctions, nuances, or important details is this phrase glossing over? 3. What questions does this phrase discourage me from asking? If you feel like asking questions about it makes you seem unreasonable, that's a red flag. 4. Who benefits from me accepting this framing uncritically? Follow the incentives. 5. Am I being presented with a false choice or a false equivalence? Are there really only two options here, and are these things really equivalent? 6. Does disagreeing with this phrase automatically make me seem unreasonable? If yes, that's not wisdom, it's rhetorical armor. So what about counter strategies? Ask the words and or so. So if someone says a phrase like, AI is just a tool, you can say, and what does that tell us about how we should regulate it, implement it, or think about its social costs? The phrase wants to be the end of discussion. Make it the beginning. You can request specificity. If you hear the phrase, it's always been this way, you could, for example, challenge it with, can you point to specific historical examples and what were the outcomes? How is this situation similar or different? Vague claims collapse under specific questions. You can name the complexity. For example, you're right that AI and calculators are both tools, but calculators don't generate text, images, or replace entire job categories. Can we discuss those specific differences? You're not rejecting the comparison in its entirety. You're refusing to let it end the conversation. You can also flip the frame. For example, the phrase, if you have nothing to hide, becomes privacy isn't about hiding wrongdoing. It's about controlling who has access to information about me and for what purpose. You're not defensive, you're just reframing the question entirely. You can identify the false choice. The phrase, you can't stop progress, assumes progress is inevitable and monolithic. So you can say something like, we've stopped or regulated plenty of progress, like leaded gasoline, CFCs, and certain pharmaceuticals. The question isn't whether we can stop progress, it's what kind of progress do we want? You can demand accountability. For example, with the phrase, it is what it is, you can say, what specifically makes it unchangeable? Who decided this, and what would it take to change it? Fatalism crumbles when you ask for specifics. The key in all of these is that you're not being combative. You're being curious, just like we advocate on this podcast. You're asking questions and refusing to let a clever phrase do your thinking for you. Here's what I want you to take away from this. Thought-limiting phrases are mental shortcuts that benefit someone, and it might not be you. The goal isn't to have perfect answers to every complex question. The goal is to keep asking questions and maintain nuance, resisting the urge to let a clever phrase do your thinking for you. These phrases work because thinking is hard, uncertainty is uncomfortable, and sometimes we just want an answer, any answer, so we can move on. But the best answers come from staying in the discomfort just a little longer, from asking one more question and noticing when something that sounds like wisdom is actually just a stop sign. This week, I'd love for you to do something. Listen hard and notice these phrases in media, conversations, maybe even in your own thinking. And when you hear one, pause. Ask yourself, what question is this preventing me from asking? What complexity is being smoothed over? And you don't have to have the answer. You just need to keep the question alive. And if you've got examples of thought-limiting phrases that you've encountered in your workplace, politics, tech discourse, or wherever, send them our way on social media. PsyberSpace has accounts on almost every platform. We want to hear them. And if you comment on the PsyberSpace Blue Sky account, it'll actually appear under the episode. We might do a whole listener examples episode if we get enough. Because once you learn to see these phrases, you can't unsee them, and that's when things get really interesting. Thanks for listening to PsyberSpace. This is your host, Leslie Poston, signing off. Keep thinking, keep questioning, stay curious, and I'll talk to you next week. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss it, and send it to a friend if you think they'd like it.